Should you buy a circular saw, a plunge saw, or both? In today's video, I'm going to run through my experience with both of these over the years to help you make the right decision. Want a second opinion? I've also checked with members on my Discord forum and you guys online. Now, if you're a bit confused right now because you've either watched this video or got halfway through it when it disappeared last weekend, I'm really sorry about that. I had a watch through when it went live and I just thought I was talking a load of rubbish towards the end. So I've made some quite important changes and I think it's much more comprehensive now. So let's dive straight in with the circular saw. It was a real gear shift for my DIY getting one of these. Up to that point, when making, for example, this wardrobe, I'd be hand cutting the panels and then planing them to achieve a clean edge to the exact dimensions I needed. And then I got my first circular saw. I hated it. It wandered everywhere and I was about to bin it when my carpenter mate John pointed out setting the blade depth is absolutely crucial. If you only have half a tooth of the blade poking out beneath the thing you're cutting, suddenly, boom, you've got an amazing tool that rips a beautiful, neat cut. And suddenly I wasn't having to plane stuff anymore. And I've used my circular saw a few different ways over the years. Firstly, by clamping a straight edge on the cutting surface and running the saw along that edge. But it's a bit fiddly measuring to ensure you've got your guide in exactly the right place. Not to mention keeping the saw straight. Secondly, I made this very basic guide rail, which is fine but relies on a certain amount of pressure to keep the saw against the guide, which could affect the straightness of the cut. So I upgraded the guide rail to this one, which was brilliant as you can line up the cut really accurately against the line in the guide rail and then simply push it along the guide with one hand without worrying about it wandering. And then of course, there's the fence. Don't dismiss this as it works surprisingly well at creating perfect straight cuts parallel to and close to the edge of the piece that you're cutting. But it does of course rely on a straight edge for the fence to run along. But it was very useful here in the construction of the doors and fascias for my bedroom wardrobe project. And the fence is also my preferred way of cutting split battens or French cleats. So everything was good with me and my circular saw. But then this epic wardrobe build came along. The full-length sheet guide that I had made at the same time was unfortunately a couple of millimeters out along its length, which meant that I couldn't get completely straight cuts. Now that's fine, I thought, because I've got my Evolution hybrid circular saw that has a groove on the base, enabling it also to run on a generic guide rail. And so I started using that. But it was generating so much MDF dust. Now I've got a couple of Evolution power tools, this miter saw for example. You've only got to look at the dust extraction on that and also this tiny thing on my Evolution circular saw to realise that Evolution just do not prioritise dust extraction. Now luckily I, by this point, was using my pop-up work tent so I could blow all the dust out of the entrance with my leaf blower, which I thought was very clever until somebody pointed out how bad that was potentially for my health. So at this point I decided to bite the bullet and buy a plunge or track saw, as they're interchangeably called. It's basically the same thing. Now there are some pretty slick systems out there and I'll talk about these later, but at this point I was keen to keep costs down. So I bought this Erbauer, which came with two actually very well made tracks. 149 quid back in March 2021 and still even today only £20 more expensive. As the name suggests, this saw plunges, circular saws don't, and it's generally used in conjunction with a guide rail, leading to effortless one-hand operation. But it also comes supplied with this pretty epic fence. At the same time, I built myself a DIY cyclone vacuum to catch all that MDF dust. I later fitted a pressure relief valve to it after the barrel collapsed like everyone said it would, and you'll find the two videos in the description. And suddenly my workshop conditions were sort of transformed. And as the years have gone by, I've used both my circular and plunge saw for various woodworking projects. So which one should you buy? Well, these two tools work very differently. With a circular saw, you have to set the height and push the blade onto the thing that you're cutting, at which point the blade protector rolls back. Or with that DIY track I made, you pull that blade protector back and slowly lower the tool into the guide, which obviously isn't ideal. And the other problem with circular saws is setting the blade height is a pretty rudimentary process. I tend to get down low, eye in the blade height below the material, and then try and reach over it and remember where the lock mechanism is so that I can lock the blade off, hoping it hasn't moved too much. And this is a bit hit and miss. It's very different though with a plunge saw. As it's designed to plunge, the plunge saw measurements are more prominent and easy to set. And on the wardrobe build, because I was interchanging between 12 and 18mm MDF, I wrote the setting points on the saw so I could simply adjust without having to check the blade height each time. So rather than starting off the side of the material like you would have to do with a circular saw, the plunge saw, once you've lined up the track, which can either just sit on the wood or be clamped down, you simply plunge it into the material and effortlessly push it along to make the cut. And this is a key point with plunge saws. You know exactly where that blade is going to plunge on the line you've marked on the material. A couple of people have asked me about clamp compatibility. Certainly in my experience, all my clamps fit all my guide rails. And the way that blade retracts back inside is inherently much safer. Also with this design, it's much more efficient at dust extraction. Just look at the dust spat out by the Evolution saw. This is one of the main hallmarks of the plunge saw, and in fact I even taped up this window to mine to make it even more efficient. So with all those strengths of the plunge saw taken into account, why would you ever buy a circular saw, I hear you ask? Well, it's not that simple. For a start, the circular saw is fabulously portable. The plunge saw is a lot heavier and a lot more bulky than the circular saw. And there are days when you're working on your bench that you just want to fling your saw around. Like that. And you're not going to be able to do that with a plunge saw. Let's not forget how brilliant my circular saw was for trimming down the rafters on my Velux window install. And I went to the builders merchant the other day, ordered a load of 4.8 metre lengths for my next project. It was getting close to closing time, there was nobody around to cut it, so I literally flung this in the van and used this to cut everything down. Again, not something you'd be able to do with your track saw. And on the subject of being out and about, whilst cordless track saws are available, they're expensive. And with a rafters square, you can do 90-degree cuts, 45-degree cuts, and you can also tilt the bed of the saw for angled or bevel cuts. Not bad. Now, we've spoken about why aluminium tracks are far superior to anything that you can make out of wood. But then these hybrid circulars have confused your decision making by being compatible with some sort of guide rail. You got this one from DIYte, again not cheap but looks like a lovely bit of kit. Ryobi with this XP saw slightly perplexingly limit you to using their plastic track, which although it is surprisingly effective, does 90 and 45-degree cuts. I wouldn't want to assemble anything longer than this. It fits together like Scalextrics. And quite frankly, why would you use something like this when you can use an aluminium track? And you don't even now have to buy a circular saw with these grooves in. Matt on my Discord channel that you can access through Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee membership bought one of these 3D printed adapters for his Erbauer circular saw. The only downside is you can't do those bevel cuts I showed you a minute ago. An Imperfect Pianist bought a Craig AccuCut available in 2 lengths, including this XL version, which means you can do full sheet cuts. But before you get too excited about this, when I first posted this video, a couple of you panned the AccuCut in the comments, so approach this with a bit of caution. And so I think you can see where I'm going with my conclusions on this. If you're lucky enough to be able to afford it, there's a place for both a circular saw and a plunge saw in your workshop. The circular saw is great for all-round jobs and for cutting lengths of timber to size. And as Stephen, who emailed me after I deleted my video last week, very sensibly put it, the circular saw can ultimately do everything a track saw can, but when it comes to accuracy, ease of use and dust extraction when working with large sheets, then the track saw is an absolute game changer. And that is why I instinctively reach for this whenever I'm cutting down sheets, whether that was for the recent Boncat build or for the base in this new garden storage box that I'm building. Again, I saved a brilliant comment from Vroom before I deleted that vid last week, where he said that for sheet materials, track saws are king. And what about table saws? Well, they're going to be out of the reach of most of us DIYers workshops. But again, Vroom mentioned a comment Scott Brown had made where he said that if a sheet is small, take it to the table saw, and if the sheet is big, then take the saw to the wood. And for that, track saws are obviously perfect. Kind of begs the question why you'd even have a table saw, given that if the sheet is small, you can pretty much sort it out with a circular saw anyway. And of course, the plunge saw. So going on to part 2 of my conclusion, what would my advice to be for a DIY beginner who knows that he wants to, or she wants to upscale their expertise with one of these gadgets? Well, it's a difficult one, but I personally think that the versatility of this circular saw, remember it can do everything the track saw can, but in the case of sheet materials, not as well. It would make a lot of sense to start your DIY journey with one of these. Now, I personally wouldn't go for a hybrid, i.e. one of those that's compatible with a track, because they're generally heavier and more bulky, which sort of defeats the object of getting one of these in the first place. And also they're not very good with dust extraction. And do your research. Look how brilliant the dust extraction was on my original Ryobi when compared to how terrible it is on their flagship XP brushless. Yes, if you're starting your DIY journey with one of these, they're not as good at sheet cutting, but you can largely negate the problems of that by planning your project, work out all your cuts with a cut list optimizer, and getting a company like Cutright to cut all the sheets down to the right length with CNC accuracy. And look at the wardrobe Darren on my Discord channel has recently built in this way, following my 7-part wardrobe build series. And he has no previous experience of doing this. And when that voice starts hammering away at you to buy your first plunge saw, you'll know it's the right time. But what sort of plunge saw should you buy? Vroom bought a Makita after, again, seeing the Scott Brown videos. I'm guessing something like this. And there's a lot of love for them out there. But obviously it's a very personal choice that largely depends on your circumstances and also budget. Look at what I built, for example, with this £150 Erbauer. And I've also heard good things about Lidl's Parkside saw, amongst others, if you're wanting to go down that budget route. But if you buy the Parkside, just remember it won't run on Makita's tracks. I'll put a link to my friend Peter Millard's brilliant video on this in the description. And at Ryburn Ryder has the McAllister and has had no complaints so far with it. Somebody recently said to me, the tool that you can afford is the best possible tool for you. And I think we need to remind ourselves about that. The only thing I would say is you personally will know whether you'll be using that tool again. And therefore, if this is part of a longer DIY journey, I would say buy the best possible tool that you can afford. Because as Pat said on my community page about his 240 volt Makita, it wasn't cheap, but it's an investment. Now, I slightly suggested in that deleted video that I wouldn't touch Festool as I don't go for expensive tools. However, the love for the Festool TS55, when paired with their vacuum, the CTL MIDI, has been massive in the comments below this and my previous video and on my community page. Yes, it's expensive, but as Frame Blend said on my Discord channel, I know it's not going to beat everyone's budget and there are cheaper options that do 90% of the same job, but I absolutely love it and do not regret the splurge. Just make sure you sneak it into your house without your other half noticing. Or maybe actually, on a sensible point out just how much money you're going to save by building these wardrobes yourself, and therefore why you can afford a tool like that. And of course, if Festool is your target, or you just want to learn more about track saws, then I point you to my friend Peter Millard's channel, because he is the track saw king, and you'll learn so much there. Now, just a quick point about tracks. I've had real problems getting this track, which is two 1.4 meter evolutions, to bolt together accurately in the middle. And even on this storage box, I've had problems with it sort of not being quite a straight line. So my advice to you is, if you're planning to do full rip cuts, get yourself something like the 3 meter Makita, because that removes any need to bolt anything together in the middle. But do remember Peter's point about some tracks having this lip, which I think is to stop the saw tilting over when you're doing one of these bevel cuts like that. Whoop! My Erbauer, which is obviously not entry level compared to the sort of £70 Parksides, but 150 quid is still pretty cheap, was designed to fit this track that has the lip on it, and the evolution works seamlessly with that. But the Makita is obviously similar to the Erbauer with this lip. So bear that in mind if you've got a saw like a Parkside, and make sure you check compatibility. So you've got your 3 meter track. You also want a 1.4 meter track to do your crosscuts. And these could be bolted together because Any inconsistencies aren't so noticeable over a short distance like this, but if you can, get yourself a 1.4 metre solid track. And don't be tempted to think, oh, don't worry, Charlie, I just unbolt my 2.8 every time I need to do a crosscut, because you're going to find that a real pain in the middle of a job. These Evolution tracks, by the way, are fantastic value for money and well worth considering, even though I've had problems with this joint. And what really good is you get these clamps with each one. And a nice little bag, I love little bags. And finally, I want to end this video by saying a massive thanks to everyone who commented on the question I posted on my community page last week about what inspired you to buy your first track saw. The comments have been so useful and they've largely informed me in terms of putting this video together. And the feedback is a number of reasons for buying plunge saws: kitchen countertops, Peter Millard again was inspiration for See More Clearly, cabinets, wardrobes, trimming down reclaimed doors. FJ Stock bought a Festool TS55 after using a DIYte track compatible circular saw for a few years. An imperfect pianist again started with that AccuCut for his circular saw, but ended up getting the track saw because of dust extraction and ability to use track squares, which are things I haven't mentioned in this video. And he hasn't used a circular saw since. Check out those comments at your leisure. I'll post a link to them in the description below this video, which of course will have details of everything else I've talked about today. So that's it for this week. Thank you so much for watching. If this is the second time you've watched this video, thank you again. If you've liked it, it'd be great if you give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to my channel, it would mean a massive amount to me to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here. And don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. See you next week.